Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Again, I'm Larry Boris. You're in the right place. It's the gun club, not the boot club. We're pleased to have two officers from the Air Force Base with us. But let's start off by just introducing yourself and where you're from.
Hi, Don Cohen from Bakersfield.
Stand at Governor, please, Ohio.
Feel better from Scottsdale, Arizona. Good summer in Chicago.
Jim Forsett, going to Montana.
Don Coates from Pittsburgh.
You gotta stop wearing that shirt.
Don Meyer, Chicago.
Dennis Ackman, Albuquerque.
Dennis McWilliams, Chicago. John Coburn, Michigan.
Joel Leslie, Buffalo. Gentlemen, introduce yourself. Get started.
My name is Nathan Russ. I'm originally from San Diego, East County, Oklahoma, grew up there. Afterwards, I decided to join the Air Force at age 19. They sent me to Minot, North Dakota, something from the north. I've been growing up super nice, temperate, like here, didn't get sent up there, so it's kind of a culture shock for me. So what I did in North Dakota was I guarded nuclear weapons. So they have a lot of intercontinental ballistic missiles up there. So I was charged with making sure that they stay safe. So I did that for about 3.5 years and decided that, hey, I don't think this is going to work out for me and my family. So I decided to get out of the military. So I actually moved up to Prescott. I got a job at the Firearms factory. I worked there for about 12 months. I worked there in the polishing department. Working on some of the Mark II pistols and a lot of the other pistols that they manufacture up there. So it's kind of a cool experience to get to kind of learn that aspect of the gun world. So I've never been in obviously manufacturing, so obviously carrying the weapon itself. So it's pretty cool. After that, I decided that this wasn't big enough money, didn't have the stability and the health benefits that obviously the Air Force had. So I rejoined the Air Force, cross-trained from regular security forces, which is like military police, to what we do now, which is basically like a lateral cross train. It's a career field called combat works training and maintenance. So our job is to train all the base personnel on the various weapon systems that you see in the handouts in front of you, as well as fixing the weapons that they break. So that's something that we do for the Air Force. So after that, I got stationed in Florida, Patrick Air Force Base in Florida, Melbourne, Cocoa Beach, really nice area. After that, I got stationed at FB Warren, Wyoming. That was a very cool experience. We got to learn a lot more of the weapons that you don't see on these pages. It's a lot of our heavy weapons, like our M2 50 cal machine gun. We also have the Mark 19 40 millimeter.
It'll help with the video.
So yeah, a lot of those heavy weapons that you wouldn't see at any other normal base, because it's a nuclear security forces base that we would employ those type of weapon systems. So that was pretty cool. We can learn that and teach that to a lot of different people. And then after that, they sent me here, where we employ most of those weapons that you see in front of you. Now I'm going to introduce or let Nick introduce himself.
Hello. My name is Sergeant Contreras, or Nick is fine. I just clarify what I'm off because it's weird. But we are stationed right now at Air Force Base. My first duty station, Washington, where I'm from. I'm actually from California as well, near San Diego, Temecula. Wine country there is where I grew up. And then from there, I worked pretty much 2 dead-end jobs until I decided to join the military at 22, so I can go over there. So I've been about 10 years now. And I went from, again, Southern California to North Dakota. They stationed me also at Minot, North Dakota for my first base. So that was kind of a culture shock. I went from and the weather. It gets -30 over there. You don't know what to do with yourself. So I was doing. We have 2 sides there. So I was regular security forces. I was on base. The other side would be off base. They go to like all the missile facilities that we have and go out in the middle of nowhere and something out there. So I was on base security, and I worked in a restricted area where you could have nothing. So 12 to 14-hour shifts, where we were basically sitting there. Just trying to talk to each other and study the materials we had. Watch out at some of the domes over there. Nothing ever happened, which is good. It's like 12, 14 hours every day was tough. I got married up there and had our first kid. and I was looking for something that was better as far as hours. So we work Monday through Friday. We can holidays off right now. That can always change, but so I did that and started in Minot, and then from there I went to England. So I was stationed at Whitney for 4 years, and then after that I came here, and I've been here for a little over 2 years in the last 2.5 years. So that is kind of the gist of my career here. And then like Sergeant Russ was talking about, what we do now as Firearms is basically train, maintain, and keep accountability for all weapons that are on Air Force installations. We don't necessarily train other branches, but we can. It just depends on the requirements of the mission, where the base is, and stuff like that. So what I did is I printed out just paper. I wasn't sure how Air Force technology is great, so I was like not wanting to rely on PowerPoint. So I printed out good old paper. Some of these weapons that you see on there are the ones that we train on here at the Air Force Base and other installations, obviously, but the mission is always different. So depending on the weapon system, it always depends on what our mission is. So I will let Sergeant Russ kind of explain some of the weapons there. We're not going to give you like details about these weapons, but we will talk about key points and why we arm them, what we use them for, depending on the mission and where we are. Because I think that you can look up a lot of details about the weapons online. And I don't want to sit here. What I'll do is I'll stand up in front of my class and I'll be like, hey, all right, this is the M4, it's a lightweight air-cooled gas-operated magazine set to 5 capable of fire and burst fire, but now with the M4A1 also fully automatic fire. So it's a little bit.
No, yeah, I think this group would like that.
Yeah, so I'll let him talk about the weapons, and then right after that, I'll kind of talk about what our day-to-day training visuals looks like, and we'll kind of push through each of those. I did bring a new optic that we haven't started using here at the Air Force Base that we can look at, and we'll kind of go from there.
All right, so looking at some of the weapons that you have in front of you, technology is constantly changing. So throughout my career, I've been doing this going on 17 years now. So some of these weapons have been in as long as I have or longer. Some of these weapons have actually helped bring into service. So the M4, when I first came in, we were still carrying M16s. We slowly transitioned over to the M4s. So a lot of times people think, Air Force military, you get the best equipment, right? So a lot of times from personal experience, the Air Force usually gets stuff a lot later than our other branches like the Army, the Marine Corps. They'll get stuff a lot sooner than we will. They'll test it out, let us know how it is, and if we decide to adopt it, we will. So we transitioned from the M16 to the M4. The M4 is actually, it's a pretty good weapon system. There might be varying opinions of it, but as far as transitioning from the M16, which we choose obviously during the Vietnam conflict up until now, it kind of helped us out a lot, especially with the different missions that we have. So some of the missions that we have from an Air Force point of view, the first one, probably one of our number one customers, is going to be the military police security forces. So those are the ones that are going to obviously keep everything going on base as it should be, as well as to kind of get rolled out into like an integrated defense type and protecting the base if the base was to get attacked. So on 9/11, I'm sure a lot of you guys remember, even if you were here, even if you weren't here, you remember kind of the steps that we had to take to protect our assets on military bases. So those are the people that mainly protect our base. We have specialty career fields such as EOD, explosive ordnance disposal. They're probably maybe like our number 2 customer as far as the deployment of most of these type weapons. The other people on base we have are like OSI, Office of Special Investigations, or like the federal law enforcement for the Air Force. They're also going to be carrying some of these weapon systems as well. And then the rest of the base. So the rest of the base are people that are going to be going downrange to deploy locations, Iraq, Afghanistan, Qatar, a place like that. So we train people on these weapon systems as well for that. Some of these weapon systems, like I said, I've seen get put into service. So if you guys see that the M203 grenade launcher, that's been in service obviously since the Vietnam conflict as well. The weapon system just below it is one that I personally was put in charge with at FE Warren with bringing into service. The M320 grenade launcher is made by H&K. So it's a 40mm grenade launcher. It can be used both in a standalone configuration like you currently see it in, or you can mount it to the bottom of an M4, just like you would with the M203.
Very heavy.
So it is very heavy. But
I would say before thing, my favorite thing about the 320 is that when we got issued these, they actually issued us a hip holster for it. So now you can hip holster a grenade launcher.
But something cool about it too, so you can see that it has a sight system on it. It's just a plastic, what they call a relief sight, very similar to what we used before with like the M79 grenade launcher back in Vietnam. But this one actually comes with a really cool piece of technology. So the company 3M, they make this little sight. It's called the ballistic sighting module. So it has like a red dot style sight on it. So it has a built-in rangefinder into it as well. So like if you do have like your regular rangefinders out and you can identify a target, say like 150 meters, you just take the little dial, turn it to 150 meters, and then put the dot on target, and that's where your grenade's gonna go. So I mean, they really didn't let me guess where it got me. And I also have like a little anti-cant feature. So as long as you have the weapon center aligned with your body, the dot is going to be steady red the whole time. But if you're canting the weapon left or right, the dot's going to start to blink, and that's an indication to you, hey, you're not centered. Fix the weapon, and then it's going to send the grenade where you want it to go. So it's actually pretty cool. It also has built-in infrared. So when we're doing night ops, just take your NVGs, flip them down in front of you, and then you can turn it to the IR, and then the IR is going to send like a little laser downrange, and then same concept. As long as the dot's steady and it's not moving, it's center around your body. It's a good shot. If it's blinking, it means you're off center. So it's pretty amazing how far we've come with the technology, these weapons, and the deployment of them.
Takes a lot of guesswork out of it. Yeah.
You have anything where the headset connects to the firearm?
We do not have a specifically. There are other, I know you're talking about that. There are some, probably more in the like battlefield airman field, the CCT, PJs, that kind of stuff. They have a lot more technology that other people just don't ever see. So obviously their requirements are much more vigorous than what we do. What I was going to kind of explain, what we do is at a base level. So we teach basic marksmanship skills to all Air Force personnel. So even the battlefield airmen will start out at us, but beyond that, they'll start moving and training further and further. And there are other courses that we can go teach at, other security forces personnel can go teach at, advanced marksmanship skill courses, and they'll start to teach you specific weapon systems as well as different sites that we might not use at a base level, but we might need for a certain mission type and stuff like that. So that's where they'll start to engage, like long distance targets and stuff like that, where they'll start using this site that we'll show you in a little bit here that has 6 times zoom, so that way they can start engaging much further than just a general red dot site and 68 site. So, but I'll kind of give you a break. I'll talk about the other weapons here. So, Sergeant Russ talked about the M4. I don't know if you noticed on the title of that front page, the very first one, it says M4A1 now. So, we had the M16s that were fully auto, and then we did a little, manufacturing and drilling on the sides of them. And we put in a sear on there so that they were then burst. And then we went to the M4, which was still burst, meaning 3 shots per trigger pull. And now we went back to the M4A1, so it's fully auto again. So M16 burst and then full auto, and then back to burst, and then M4 burst to full auto. So their ideology behind that perhaps is that the more bullets have range is better, but it still wants to be controlled. So we still haven't updated any of our ports of fire to reflect the auto. We still train as if they're firing controlled bursts, but it allows them to put more round down range. So that's pretty cool. And then you saw the 2 and 3 below that. It's just attached on the front of the weapon system there. It does not detach like the 320 on the bottom of the page. So that's pretty neat. The 320 can be a standalone weapon. And then something they talked about, that BSM, that sight that is very, very accurate. easy to use for many people. That site is worth about $13,000. So it's worth phenomenally more than what it is, which is kind of the case for a lot of sites. I think even just across, in general public use. So if you flip over to the backside, you'll see these two machine guns on there. You have the M249 and the 240. So the M249 and the 240 on the bottom there. Some of you may have remembered if you ever served or even just following along from the military, we had the M60, right? The M60 I've never seen in my career, but I did find a stash of parts once and I had no idea what they were. So, we're using the M240 Bravo now. There are several different types of 240s, the one on the bottom of the page there. But what we use is the Bravo. You might have one like the Delta that has that they mount on like Osprey helicopters and stuff like that. I got to fire one of those over the beaches of England. Had a boat that was floating in the water, stuff pretty cool. But they're butterfly triggered, so it's just small variations, basically the same main weapon system there. Above that, the 249 is probably everybody's favorite, right? Saving Private Ryan, running around the saw. It's a 5.56, shoots 5.56. The one below it is 47.62. So it's a little bit lighter, more versatile, allows you to carry a 200 round bandolier versus the 240 is going to be a 100 round bandolier. So what you're initially armed up with is a lot more capability. What's that? Yep. Well, so for the 249, we like it to be belt fed, but it also has a magazine capacity. So if you have magazines or big gun magazines, you can put them in there. But a lot of times the 249 fires so fast that it'll shred the magazine after it's empty. So we like to use belt fed for all of our training as well as for the 240. These weapon systems, what we would use them for on more of a day-to-day basis standpoint. So on a more of a day-to-day basis, we use them for our nuclear operations, stuff like that. We use them in mounted towers to protect certain areas. We use them on mounted Humvees, so they're mobile, all of that kind of stuff. When we go down range, usually there is two 249s per team, one 240 per team. And that's just how we set it up. So there's 3 heavies per team. And then obviously they have their motion. So those are some of the capabilities. We do not train on Luke Air Force Base with these weapons. We go out to Florence, which is you probably know better than me, but southeast up here. And it is very hot. And we go on to a guard range out there and we train. And usually that's a full day event. And sometimes it's longer than that because these weapons can be notorious for breaking down. So any belt fed weapon is going to be hotter. We do barrel changes every 200 rounds, and you add on 110 degree weather here, and you're going to end up doing barrel changes every 100 rounds. So it takes a long time. Each individual will shoot about 1,600 rounds. So you can imagine if we have 20 individuals, it takes a long time. So if we kind of push forward to the next page, you have these 2 pistols, and I'll let Sergeant Russ talk about that.
Okay, so for the pistols that we use, the Air Force, when they first started deploying pistols, we were using the M15, the old Smith & Wesson 38 caliber. They decided that that was not sufficient enough for the needs of our troops, so they transitioned to the Beretta M9, which I'm sure many of you have probably seen before, used or owned yourself. We've had that for 37 years, pretty 1985. So yeah, we've had it in service for quite a long time. So the Air Force, if it's not broke up, fix it type mentality. I think it's kind of why we've had it as long as we have. But that aside, I mean, it is a very reliable weapon. But with the advancement of technology, like I spoke about earlier, there's always going to be something newer, better that you can use, right? So what we recently started using is the SIG there. So the civilian equivalent would be the 320 M18, same thing. So it's a little bit better in the aspect you have a larger magazine capacity. So you have a 21 round magazine and a 17 round magazine chambered at 9mm that we're utilizing. So instead of only having 30 rounds like we would with the Beretta for a standard duty load, we now have 38 rounds. So I mean it's not that much more, but I mean it's quite a bit more firepower that you bring into the fight. From personal experience, they're not really I don't want to speak badly of SIG, but just the Air Force particular ones that I have come into contact with have experienced some issues. Some of those issues being that the site will fall off and go to the base in the middle of firing. So that's a very, very common issue. Something that we've done to kind of help prevent that is we'll take the weapons apart, we'll put a little bit of extra Loctite on there, and we'll put them back together. It's not just a Luke Air Force Base problem, it's a big Air Force Base problem, so it's something that we're dealing with and trying to fix. It's something that I'm saying that we're experienced with the Beretta, we didn't have to worry about the Beretta falling apart in the middle of training, so.
Beretta is a break. I mean, they gauge them. They gauge them to fire about 5,000 rounds before they would have any sort of interruption or malfunction. On average, they actually reach 15 to 16,000 before each. So super reliable weapon, even for how big it will be.
So you gotta think about it too, so like I said before, we train everyone on base, so like our weapons have seen a lot of stuff. So we put thousands of rounds to each weapon, so over time, you're gonna start to see common issues, so like, for example, on an M4, we get through maybe 100,000 rounds, we might have to replace the barrel, so we do specific gauging on different weapon parts to make sure that they're within tolerance, and they're gonna work when we need them to work, so. For example, with the M4 will do like barrel straight. So we have a gauge that goes down, the barrel's bent. Obviously, that's going to negatively impact your accuracy. Same thing with barrel erosion. So we have a gauge that goes down into the bore. If it goes down too far, that means that the barrel's no good. So we have to replace it. So just some of the things that we have to worry about as far as keeping these weapons in good working order and making sure that they're going to work for our students. Not only for our students, but also for, like I said, our operational guys as well, our cops. Our EOD, or OSI, people like those.
So as far as the pistols, right, we've been using the M9 Beretta for 37 years, came into service in 1985. When we transitioned to the state, obviously there's a lot of contracts that put out. Beretta was trying to get back into that contract. Whether they transitioned to the M18 because of the versatility or because of the way it looks a lot cooler or whatever, more round capacity. I don't know the official reason, but just some of the differences that are kind of cool to note. The M9 Beretta is hammer operated. So when you squeeze the trigger, that very first shot is double action, which is going to be a little bit over 10 pounds of trigger pull, which is a lot. So a lot of times what we had with the issue with the shooters training them was that they would anticipate this trigger pull. So they would be squeezing a lot and they push into it and then they shoot down or in front of them or really low on the target where they need to aim. So it was an issue, obviously, for everybody who kind of had no health habits developed or bad habits developed. When you transition to the M18, if you have a 320 yourself or you're familiar with the platform, it's striker fire. So that trigger pull is like 3 to 4 pounds, it's way less. Even the single action on the M9 is still about 5 to 6 pounds. So that anticipation is there anymore. And so we've seen a lot of corrections that we had with individuals who are training them that they no longer have those issues with the M18. Another cool thing is that the M18 has tritium sights on there, so they kind of glow in low light conditions. So that way you can kind of see a little bit better where you're aiming, making sure everything's lined up in those low light conditions. Along with that, it's a modular pistol, which just means you probably know that it's better than me, some people. But it just means we can attach equipment to it. So on the front there, below the tip of the barrel, you can see there's these little rails there, like Picatinny rails. You can attach a little laser aiming device or flashlight and stuff like that. We have not so far, but that's just dependent on needs, capabilities. I know we will probably start trying to put flashlights on there because we always have people who work with lights on them. So, and then obviously, if you're kind of looking at it and wondering the difference between the M18 and the 320, the civilian version, really is basically the safety cylinder. They were like, we don't want to give the military a weapon that doesn't have a safety cylinder on there. So they put one on there. And it has confused a lot of people because on the M9, the safety selector needs to be down to be unsafe, but the M18 needs to be up. So they just wanted to throw it through two people points. But those are the kind of some of the differences between the two pistols. Why they transition to them, who knows? But Another thing I like about it is we obviously have just in this room, we have people that are from West Coast, East Coast, up in New York, all that kind of stuff. In the military, it's even further than that. We have people from all over the world. And so everybody's different sizes, shapes, and stuff. This pistol, you can actually change the lower part of the handguard because it's just polymer plastic. And we have large grips, we have medium grips, we have small grips. So it's something that has allowed people to be a little bit more comfortable while shooting. And the pistol and the rifle, obviously on the front page there, the M4A1, that's gonna be our standard weapon that we train on, probably about 95%. Other weapon systems, the grenade launchers, the machine guns, those are about twice a year for us here at the Air Force Base. And we're gonna be doing those weapons, actually, another class next month, so just, pray for us in August. We're July out there, so. But at new bases, we'll do the heavy weapons. Actually, when I was at Minot, when he was at Minot, we were doing those probably every other week because we have to, use all of our capabilities to guard the new weapons out there. So that is our weapon systems. So what I kind of wanted to, yeah, go for it.
The SIG, do you guys have problems with the firing without pulling the trigger or the drop
We have not.
like the civilians?
No, I know that there was a lot of news around that drop test that it failed. I have not seen anybody physically drop this yet. But I haven't heard of any safety issues like that in the Air Force. The main thing that Sergeant Russ talked about is that if you look at the rear sight there, there's a plate on top and there's a plate on the back. And what happens is there's one little screw that maybe has 2 or 3 threads that go into the weapon system holding that in place. And so if they're not Loctited correctly, which was a deficiency that they found out, Air Force wide, we corrected it and now the sights aren't flying off in people's faces. So that's a good thing. But we have not seen that. Yeah, there's always a possibility. Yes, sir.
Do any of the armed forces still use the 1911? And why did they transition away from the 1911?
That is a fantastic question. I don't know why, but I know that the 1911 was replaced by the M9 Beretta in 85. Yeah, so,
I can actually answer that. I was in the Army when we did
Oh, yeah.
that. And we transitioned to the Beretta 9mm because that was gonna be the NATO standard. They wanted to standardize ammunition across all the NATO countries. So that's why we
that
had this.
does make sense.
But my 1911 shook for all the parts, right?
Yeah, it's obviously the 1911 was a 45, and so all of our pistols now are 9mm.
It's only 7 shots.
The 1911 was, yeah. So, I mean, we've already improved the capabilities, right? 15 round magazine capacity for the M9. Now we're at 17 and 21 round capacity for the M18. Who knows, the future may was 15 round magazines on pistols, I don't know. But what we're gonna kind of transition to now is we talked about the weapons, we talked about some of the capabilities, what we use them for, all that kind of stuff. Just sort of a day-to-day of what we do specifically in our job. It's not as glorious and fun as it looks like. When I tell people on the outside, like, oh yeah, I'm a firearms instructor for the Air Force. They're like, oh, man, you get to shoot guns all the time. I'm like, yes, about 20% of the time. The other 80% is a lot of paperwork. The Air Force loves to track absolutely everything. So I'll let Sergeant Russ kind of talk about just what a day-to-day looks like for us. Maybe specifically here at Luke, and then what it might look like at a busier base, which we have both things.
So yeah, like you said, it's not all as glorious as it's, you think it is, like, oh, you shoot guns all day, like, not really. So from like my point of view, like what we do, so like we'll project about 3 months out as far as classes that we need to train all the people on base for. So our cops, they take up a good chunk of our time. So they used to have annual qualification, and then they had like a semi-annual qualification, and now it's quarterly. So now they have to come see us quarterly. So we have approximately, I think 170, 180 active duty uniform wearers, and we also have our civilian staff officers. Luckily, with this new change to the course of fire, it has not affected our civilian folks just yet. So it kind of takes a little bit off our plate for right now. So they take up a vast majority of our time, but then we also have the rest of the base. So we have everyone from cooks to maintainers, you name it, any other career field, medical. So they'll get tasked frequently throughout the year. So when it's time for them to have to deploy, then they have to come see us. So that takes up obviously some time as well. And then also you have your readiness numbers. So the Air Force used to have different arming groups. So you have A, B, and C. So A would shoot annually, B every 2 years, C every 3 years. They decided to do away with that because it was wasting money. We didn't have money at the time. So then they went just to A and B. So A would fire every year, B would fire only when tasked to deploy. And then they're like, okay, well, some people have been in for 10, 15, 20 years and never have shot. So that's not good for our armed forces. So now they're back to ABC. And B and C are now both firing every other year. So that kind of, put the workload up a little bit more on us. So our typical class size, our range is a 14.25 meter style range. So we have fully enclosed side where we can turn off the lights. There's no light or air or anything come in. And we have our outdoor side, which we have, open baffles, so it's open to the air, the environment, stuff like that.
Fully contained. Rounds aren't getting out of it, but if you walk out into the range, you can see the sky.
Correct. So we, on any given day, can do up to 14 people at one time, mission dependent. Sometimes, like, for example, today we're in 2 days, we have 4 or 5 instructors coming in the AM, we have 4 or 5 instructors coming in the PM just to meet mission requirements. So you'll have your primary instructor. So just for example purposes, I'll be the primary instructor. I'm always going to have my assistant instructor. He's always sitting in the back of the classroom in case anyone has any needs or if they're having difficulty understanding the function of the weapon. So for example, clearing, if somebody can't clear a weapon out after we've gone over it, he's going to be my two in charge to kind of help fix what I can as I'm trying to instruct the rest of the class. So while the class is being taught, we have other instructors that are doing all the paperwork. So when the students come in, obviously they'll sign in. We have our own system in which we have to track all the expenditure of ammunition. So you have your guy pulling ammo. You also have 1 or 2 guys that are setting up the range. So we're setting up all kinds of different targets. We're setting up dummy rounds for different courses of fire, stuff like that. So I mean, your typical day for a combat arms instructor, we'll show up at 7:30, and then we're leaving. I don't know, 4:30, 5:30, 6, just depends on the day. So there's actually quite a bit that goes into our training, but like Sergeant Contreras said, it's very basic entry level, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, especially for the people that don't touch the guns very often. But it's something that kind of gets a little tedious. So I've been doing this job for 12 years, which for a combat arms instructor is not really that common. So normally once you rank up, so like I'm a staff sergeant, once you get to tech sergeant level, they can take away your ability to do this job, or they can choose to keep you in doing so. So it just depends on the manager. So if the manager says, hey, we've already got someone running the shop as a tech sergeant, and you just made tech, then hey, cool, we get to go be a cop again. So it's not a guarantee to do what you do or what we get to do. So it just depends on your ability to make rank or not make rank.
With that, for as far as like what we do for our job, it's not like lower ranking. You have to be in the military at least 2 years to be able to transition into this job. But we're still broader community as security forces. That's still our main job. We're just like what they call a shred out. There's 2 for security forces: combat arms, us training weapons, and then K9, obviously with the dogs. And so there's a little sibling rivalry there, but we can train out. Their course is a lot longer, obviously, for working and handling the dogs. There's a lot more that goes into that. Our course that we go down to back to Texas is about 2 months long. We learn all of the basic weapons, and then they send us back to our shops, and then that's where we go even further, and we might train for another year on teaching and learning and maintaining these weapon systems. As far as when we're doing our job, our career field already has been undermanned for a long time. So just to give you an idea, here at the Air Force Base, we're actually pretty heavy right now, but we do have 4 people that are leaving, so that'll leave 6 of us. We need at least 3 people for a class, at least, so we'll have 6. And so if we have 2 days, then we don't have any room for anybody to be sick or to be out or anything like that. We fire a little over 2,000 people a year here at the Air Force Base. In Minot, when I was there, we were firing a little over 5,000 people every single year. So you can see there's a vast difference. That shop had about 13 people. So our career field is undermanned, but they always seem to make a, a way for us to work it out and find out for us to do it. And we always keep meeting the mission objective because that's what we're supposed to do. But something you said earlier is that I thought was just kind of interesting, and I know we always look at military as like they're the 1%, like we're just people. And so you have people who come into the military who've never touched a gun before, or people who were in the military didn't touch a gun for 10+ years because their job might have been medical anesthesiologists and they haven't need to. But we train them, so you have a vast amount of people who are comfortable and who are not comfortable. So our job as combat arms instructors at that basic level is to get everyone in the military comfortable with using these weapon systems. Because at minimum, they may pull an M4 or an M9 or an M80. So that is what we do. Kind of mentioned earlier, there are other advanced marksmanship skill courses and other courses for the M2 and the Mark 19. And so those are like mounted 50 cal machine guns, mounted 45 grenade launchers that go on vehicles. We obviously have no reason for a mounted 50 cal or grenade launcher here at the Air Force Base yet. And so we don't train on those weapon systems here. We don't have any reason, or the mission doesn't dictate it. So depending on the mission, you have a vast majority of requirements depending on the bases, where we are in the world, the bigger mission, all of that kind of stuff. So we have security forces personnel, but they're just people. And so we might have somebody who came in and they have never touched a gun before, and now we have to get them comfortable with that. And so that's our main objective. I want somebody to be able to be picking up this weapon system, be able to clear it out safely, handle it safely, load it safely, and fire it safely. And so we spend the majority of our day, like you said, we come in at 7:30 in the morning, and we don't leave until almost dinner time. And we are training those people probably about 4 to 5 hours of classroom time, and then another 3 hours on the range shooting. So that is a long day for people, and especially by the time we get to shooting, they're already tired. And so we have a lot of things that we have to pick up. And most of the time, we have to learn a lot of verbal judo, because you have a few guns pointed at you and trigger squeezed at you and stuff like that. You get really uncomfortable. But I mean, at this point, I think we're pretty used to doing the job for 12. I've been doing it for 8. We're pretty desensitized. So I'm pretty used to people handling weapons probably how they shouldn't. But the idea is that we get them comfortable so they do it correctly. I mean, safety is going to be the most important thing for us, because at the end of the day, if they can't handle the weapon safely, then we'll have them come back to another class and they'll sit there for another 8 hours and learn again. So, but that is kind of our weapon systems, our day-to-day activities, and I'm sure that there's some questions, so we'll kind of open it up to that and kind of progress there, and maybe we'll be redirected to another topic.
Well, I do want you to show the scope.
Yes, so I'll answer your question while he breaks that out.
What's the training criteria for air crews?
For aircrew, depending on the base, like aircrew, usually they're group A, so they train annually. They'll fire annually, but it depends too. If they're Osprey pilots, they'll train on before and in pistol. If they are just fighter pilots, like what we see here, we have a weapon system called the GAU-5. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The barrel detaches from there, and then they can fold it up, put it under their eject seat, so that way if they get separated from the plane, they have an M4 with them. It used to be just pistol with them. Now they have that GAU-4, which is still 5.56. It's an M4, iron sights only, no 68, no sight on there, and the barrel attaches with 2 clips basically, and you only get about 1,500 rounds out.
They don't have to qualify once a year?
They do, yes. Our pilots here, because Luke Air Force Base is a training base, they're not generally qualifying unless they're PCS or going to the next installation. So we do have a lot more enlisted personnel who qualify versus officers in general. Enlisted will do M4 and officers will do M9.
Why don't you talk about what that is?
Yeah, let me explain that real quick, because I know you guys are gonna pass around and look at it. So this, if you look at the M4A1 on the top of the page here, on that picture, is a 68. And if you're familiar with the 68, or if you're not, I'll just kind of explain it real quick. So the M68 is a free floating red dot optic. So it has two little mirrors in there, a little red dot that points out and just floats in the middle of the, I should have brought one, but I apologize, I didn't. But it floats in there. And so basically the iron sights, you have to line up your rear sight, your front sight, and the target, and float one eye and focus on the front sight. There's a lot of work that's involved with that, right? Obviously, you guys can shoot. With the 68, you can have both eyes open, you put the red dot on the target, and that's where your rounds will go. So it's very user friendly. If you get to mess around with one, or if somebody has one, I'm sure somebody does, I would highly recommend checking it out. It changes the ability of just an average shooter to make them a lot better. So that's what we use right now. That's what we've been using for many, many years. But we are transitioning to certain individuals, not everybody, to this site here, which is a DVO, and I forgot what DVO stands for. Quick test. So Big makes it, and so this light, we're replacing the 68, putting it on the M4. And so you can see a pretty big sight. It's a lot heavier than the 68, but what it allows for is a 6x zoom capability. Yeah, so as you kind of pass it around, you'll be able to turn that knob there. You'll see it'll go from just 1x all the way up to 6x zoom. And so if you look out the window, you'll be able to see that lady walking out the park from there what's in her hand. So check that out. But as you look at it, you kind of want to see there's a bigger side on there, a smaller side. Look through the bigger side. It looks like you want to look through the smaller side, but look through the bigger side. What I don't like about this is that there is dead space in there. So anybody who has like a scope that you look through and you kind of have to find that right spot, because otherwise it turns black around there. We're having to train individuals who've never used a scope before on this piece of equipment, so that way they can utilize it correctly. So there's a big gap between this and the 68, where you keep your eyes open, find the target with the red dot on there, almost like a video game. And then this, you have to do a lot more work for it. So we will train specific individuals on it that have that requirement, because we have certain positions that, like for the air show that we might have next year, we will have certain people who are going to be blitzed out with these that will be in higher sniper type positions, and they can see a lot further than just your person at the gate. So that is that site, and it's a DVO, and I will think about it and we'll come back to what DVO stands for. But if you have questions, I don't think it's that easy. I wish it was, but we just got in transition. We had 240 in stock, and we've only issued 2. So I can see how Go ahead, sir.
Do you have the civilian equivalent of like a certified gunsmith? Because you said you maintain the guns, and there's got to be something to that. So
There is. So the gunsmith shop is in Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. So we, as common arms instructors across the Air Force, we have over $100,000 worth of parts in our Vidmar lockers that we can pretty much replace and repair anything on the weapon system except the receiver. So if we have a receiver that breaks, anything that's serialized, like the M18, the receiver is not actually anything you're seeing, it's inside. So if that was to break, we have to send that back to the gunsmith shop in Lackland, Texas. They will fix it or replace it and then send us. So we don't do anything outside of that, but anybody else can't even change a buttstock. So it's just us.
So everyone has to be proficient on all the weapons? Are they
Yeah.
giving them all? Or no.
No, I'm sure that there's a lot of people in medical that wish they were professional machine guns. But it just depends on their job requirements and where they're deploying and what their deployment requirements are. So generally, the M4A1 and the M18 is going to be our standard issue now. It's going to be what we're going to be using across the board, Air Force wide. So most people will qualify on the M4A1. Certain jobs will qualify on the M18 pistol, but the machine guns, the grenade launchers, those are more specifically security forces, EOD, and then obviously your battlefield airmen, CCT, SEER, combat weather, PJs, those kind of guys. But they also have other weapon systems like the Glocks and the PT-28s and stuff like that. So
Yeah, part of your training is it also the takedown and cleaning?
Yes.
Yes, sir. So, so everyone that we train on all these different weapon systems, we'll train them on the basic disassembly, not like the detailed kind like we do, but just the basics, just take apart and keep it working. Sure.
We have to inspect them before we fire every single time. So we walk students through inspection of the weapon system. So that way they know what to look for if something's broken or if there's something lodged in the barrel. I had somebody look through the barrel and they couldn't see through the barrel. And I was like, okay, you're just not looking right. And I looked through the barrel, there's something in there. I put a cleaning rod through there and it's a beetle. So like, you never know what you're gonna do. But we've also had instances where cops train with their same duty weapon that they've been issued and assigned, and they will do simunition firing, where we fire basically like paintball, but they're little plastic pellets that have a little bit of paint in them, and they'll do that with their duty weapon. And so it's very important for them to come back, rod their barrel, make sure they can see through the barrel, because I've had 2 weapons explode on students because they did not check their barrel and said that they did. So you have situations like that where it's like, for us, safety wise, we pretty much always go through, and if it's not our weapons, we'll rod them, make sure we can see the rod, make sure there's nothing in the barrel, because we just don't want issues like that. So
Did they sustain injuries when
one of them did, one of them did not. And I've also had a 240 blow up on a student, completely natural malfunction. There's nothing the student could have done for it. Broke 2 of his fingers, and so now his hand is like this. But he'll get disability.
So as instructors, most of our members use handguns. What do you recommend for better accuracy, better effectiveness? What kind of training?
So have you guys heard of dry fire drills? I mean, obviously you can dry fire, so that, you know, your fingers done, whatever. But honestly, I mean, you're gonna get a lot out of those dry fire drills. Now, something that we do too, it's gonna depend on the weapon system that you're employing. So with the Beretta M9, the barrel was on top that came through the slide, so it made it a little bit more difficult to do this. But if you just take like a dime, put the dime on top of the platform of the weapon, focus on that trigger squeeze. It was significant with that Beretta because we did have that double action, which was about 12 to 15 times the pressure. So it kind of focused you to be, you know, a little bit smoother on the trigger. So people have all kinds of bad habits. One of the bad habits that we try to focus on is not jerking the trigger. So if you're jerking the trigger, obviously there's really no telling where those bullets are going to go. Whereas if you're slowly squeezing the trigger to the rear, almost to the point of where you let it surprise you, actually you should let it surprise you. So if you're squeezing it and it's surprising when it goes off, and honestly you're doing yourself, you know, all you can to make you a better marksman. So yes, sir.
What about the
This with the finger?
Yeah, we talked about that. Burger hooking it.
Yeah.
So what I always recommend is the first pad of your finger, about cut that in half. So if you have any more finger in there as you're squeezing it, you're gonna notice that you're pulling it to the left. Or if you're left-handed, you're pulling it to the right. So I always recommend half of the first pad of your finger as low on the trigger as possible. So you want to try to make it as easy as you can. Obviously, if you're way high up on the trigger, it's gonna be a lot more difficult to pull that trigger. Good question.
Half of our classes that we do after we teach like the functional stuff is gonna be fundamentals. So we talk about how the weapon works, how it disassembles, how we put it back together, inspect it, how we load it, how we clear it. We do all of that kind of stuff, how we deal with malfunctions. And then the second half of that is fundamentals. I usually break it down into 4 categories. We have body position, you have your sights, you have your trigger, and you have your breathing, your sights, and your triggers. So we have certain position requirements for our courses of fire in the Air Force. So we teach them those positions, how to fire in those positions comfortably. And then we teach them how to work on their sight control, their breathing, and trigger control. And so we go over all of that with all the students, kind of break. I mean, we each have our own ways that we break it down, but generally it's the same for each of us, how we teach our students how to deal with those different variations. Because when we're downrange and we're looking at their target, we need to be able to identify, okay, if you're high, why are you high? If you're off to the side, why are you off to the side? So that's where we'll coach them during practice phases of firing to be able to adjust for those type of errors. Yes, sir.
I'm sure most people here are retired military are allowed to use any of the things that look or.
No, not even other branches right now are allowed to use our range. Guard, reserve, and active duty. Just because our range is already falling apart as it is.
Could you talk about the tour though we talked about before?
Yes, so we did talk about, and this is something that I'll get with Larry and kind of set up an email for us sometime in the near future, perhaps. We definitely have done we call them dog and pony shows, and we'll come out, you guys come out, and we can actually physically, other than a piece of paper, we can have you go hands on with the weapons, check them out and stuff like that. So that might be something. That's definitely possible. Yes, sir.
See, your Beretta, it sounded like you guys liked that weapon a lot, except for it was really heavy. You never noticed any like extreme problems with it during all those years?
So for example, I'll say I've retired probably about 50 of those M9s. So I don't know if it was a manufacturer error, but once you remove the slide, you have two rails. You have two rails in the back and two rails in the front. For some reason, the back right rail would always break once it got to like a certain amount of rounds. Like there's no rhyme or reason to it. So I had a pistol that broke 100,000 rounds. One was like 150, 200, like no rhyme or reason, but just always that back right rail. So what'll happen is the weapon will lock up. The person's like, hey, I can't clear it out, something's wrong. So we'll go to clear it out. And sometimes you have to further break the receiver just to get the slide off. So yeah, that is a common problem that I have seen with the Berettas.
I heard it, the slide coming back at you.
I've heard of that too. Yeah, I think that was earlier in the years when we were employing them. I haven't seen one of those. Yes, sir.
You talk a lot about duty weapons. Do you have a preference for personal? For yourself? I mean, we've asked that question of others.
I actually don't have as many guns as probably many of you do. I have a P365, the XL that I use for just.
365.
Yeah.
I had that same.
Yeah, the XL one stuff.
And I carried the Glock 26. I carried it for a while now. I like it. It's holds true. But honestly, it's all personal preference.
Yeah,
For sure.
honestly, one of the biggest things that we teach students as well, like when they're firing, is what you're comfortable with. You're firing a weapon system and it's uncomfortable because it's too small, it's too big, it's too bulky, it's too heavy, trigger pulls too much, whatever it may be, you're not going to do well. You need to be comfortable with it. And that also comes in time as training with it. So like if you really like the gun, don't just say, oh, I'm uncomfortable with it, train with it, get comfortable. It's like, yeah. Yes, sir.
Do the different branches, they use different types of weapons? Or do they all come together at any time and say this one's worked best and we should use that or anything?
Not necessarily. So the way we got the M18 actually is the Army took up the contract for the M17, just a larger platform. And then once they kind of vetted it, then we got the M18 after that. Same thing with a lot of the weapons that we use, they're going to go through the Army first. The Army is going to pick up the contract. They have way more people than we do. They're going to vet it. They're going to use it. They're going to train with it. And if they like it, then the other branches are like, we'll kind of start to pick it up after them. But they're kind of the front end of that. So it's pretty standard though. Like we're all using the M4s, the M4A1s now. We're all using, we transitioning to the M18 or the M17 platform. It's going to be the same. So that way, when we have joint operations go down the range and we're working with other units, other branches and stuff like that, there's general cohesiveness. Versus if we were all just using whatever we wanted, there would be a lot of lapses in training and I couldn't pick up so-and-so's weapon in the Army, downrange and necessarily use it the way I should.
What did the pilots get?
Pilots dependent on what they're piloting. You're talking about like fighter jets and stuff like that. So fighters, kind of like what I was talking about earlier, it's called a GAU-5. The GAU-5 is an M4 platform, but the barrel separates from the receiver with two clips. So you can unclip the barrel, it folds up, the old one's fold up. This one separates completely, goes under the seat so that if they were to eject from their plane, they were able to have an M4 platform on them now versus before it was just a pistol. So there's a lot more rounds. They get 60 rounds versus 15. So
They're not really meant for like long-term use or anything like that. They're kind of what you would consider disposable.
because as soon as you put more than like 1,000 or 1,500 rounds down that barrel, it's shot. The seal that is supposed to hold the barrel to the receiver is done.
It's like we don't even train the pilots on those weapons. Like me personally, I've never even seen one. But
We had a few at like Yeah, but we fired one and they said never fired one. Because of that, because basically you have to buy a whole new barrel system to replace it, so it wasn't worth it, the money.
So it may be just in the movies, but sometimes you see these pilots, they're jumping out of a plane or in a parachute, and there's the enemy below and they're shooting from, you ever train them to shoot from a parachute?
So, most of the time, those guys that are floating down die, so. So, we can have aerosol schools, where people learn how to engage with helicopters, but most of the time what we do is getting people on the ground. Ospreys, I've flown the Ospreys. I can show you some videos afterwards, just kind of some of the stuff that I got to do. It's pretty cool. But those guys, they're dropping in, 10, 12% are getting out, and then they're flying out of there. They're not going to engage really from that. It's just a big target for the enemy. So.
Right.
Totally off topic.
Let's see.
We've all seen the naval footage. Of the ship from the warships and from the naval things. Anytime soon, the Air Force is going to be releasing some.
I wish. I'm still keeping my eye out for anything abnormal I've seen yet. So I haven't gotten to work in any, hush bases. So.
Great.
In one session, how many different weapons do I shoot?
Say it one time.
You said there's like 5 hours class, 3 hours shooting. How many different weapons?
Well, okay, so-
To shoot one.
So an 8-hour class, 3-hour class for the 203 grenade launcher, and 3-hour class, 4-hour class for the 320. For the 249, it's a 2-day class, 1 day teaching, 1 day firing. The 249 is a 3-day class, 2 days teaching, 1 day firing. And then the physical is anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. So
Thank you.
that is, you have to come back for like a week and a half.
Yeah. All right, any other questions? Let's thank Nick and me.
You.
We will try to do it toward the base. What's a good time of year to do that?
You can come on,
You use a point system on targets.
it is, yeah. So
Qualified, in other words, has to be something I have to do.
yeah, so as far as that, it depends on the course of fire, the weapon system. For the heavies is not necessarily, we're not going down range and counting how many shots they shot on the side of a Humvee or something like that. I won't be able to do that. But it's target engagement. So if I tell them to shoot at this target and they don't get it within 4 or 5 trigger pulls, then there's an issue and you address it. But generally, as long as they can engage with most of the time they do, those are good. For the M4, I mean, we're firing, depending on the group, anywhere from 100 to 300 rounds per person. So those requirements are vast. I can, if you guys do end up coming out and doing a little tour, I can show you what a course of fire looks like. It'll look like a lot of gibberish, but I can kind of explain it because we have minimum requirements, certain amount of rounds, positions, time limits, all that kind of stuff.
What's best for training in handguns, distance wise? Should you always use like 3 feet, 20 feet, or how do you do?
What we do for our qualification is at 7, 15, and 25
meters.
Yep. So beyond that, we in our lesson plans, even what we talk about as the maximum effective range to engage a target with a pistol is 50 meters. So anything beyond that, you're not even going to be able to effectively engage. I'm sure there's some you could, but that's generally what we train for.
Great. Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. Sure. Thank you.
We got a meeting next.